Welcome to Healed to Heal, the podcast that champions radical faith, confronts unbelief, and amplifies a single truth. Jesus still heals. He always has. He never stopped. So whether you're still lying on the mat or carrying someone else to Jesus, this is for you. Hi, friends, and welcome back to the Heal to Heal podcast. I'm your host, Kathleen Johnson, and I'm so excited today because I have an extra special guest with me here in the studio. His name is Rory Paquette, and he is a husband and father, but he is also a professional podcaster, speaker, coach, and author. This man hosts an astonishing 6 different podcasts, including but not limited to The Power of Man, Wake Up the Lions, and the Podcaster Nation. Each one of these is built on purpose, encouragement, and truth. And you guys are going to be blown away by this man's journey. I was and have been. I've gotten to know Rory just a little bit, but he has survived a near-death experience. He has overcome deep personal trauma, and he had the courage to step away from the corporate world to pursue what he felt the calling was that God placed on his heart. So, and through his work today, he now helps people reclaim their strength, their faith, and their identity. He helps podcasters build purpose-driven platforms that actually change lives. It is extraordinary. Rory, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Oh, better than I deserve, but thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much. Looking forward to this.
Wonderful. Well, again, we know each other just a little bit. I had an opportunity of coming on one of your shows and I talked all about me, but I really want the listeners to learn all about you. And you have overcome so many things, and we're going to unpack some of those. But in terms of your background, your early life and upbringing were not easy. A lot of challenges from what I understand. And I think that's probably a huge backdrop for where you are today. Could you share with us how those early years shaped your faith and your sense of calling?
Absolutely. Great question. My early years did shape me a lot, and they shaped my faith in sort of an adverse way. I had a very very tough childhood. Basically, it was a lot of abuse, physical, emotional, the whole 9 yards. Had a dad who was an alcoholic by every definition of the word. And, he basically would come home, drink, and beat somebody up. And that's just kind of how it went. And it was sort of norm for life. It started off being mostly my mother that took the beating for a while. And it didn't take long for my brother and I to realize that we needed to, do something about that. And we were young kids at the time. But we started making sure that we ticked him off, when he came home so that he would take it out on us and leave her alone. She kind of figured that out after a while. And so it almost became a sort of a ridiculous game of who's going to tick him off first, because she didn't want us taking the hits and we didn't want her taking them. So, but when you grow up like that, you, even though your parents are taking you to church when they're playing parent, and when my dad's out there, wearing the suit and looking like he's, somebody to the rest of the world, what's happening at home. And you go to church and you listen to things about God and everything God is supposed to do and how great he is. And then you go home and you live through that absolute hell.
Yeah.
So growing up, I started off mad at God and ended up saying there must not be one.
Wow.
So my childhood set the stage for doubt in a big way. And that unfortunately was kind of how I launched into my teen years and so on, just from that abuse that we had to deal with.
I'm sorry to hear about that. That must have been unbelievable. And I'm sure nobody that hasn't experienced that can really know what that's like. But you say that it went on, through your teen years, but you obviously are a person of faith today. At what point during your journey did that, going to church sometimes and being angry with God and thinking, forget all this, at what point was there a change, and what was it? What was the trigger?
Throughout the years, from, early years and beginning teenage years to, in your 40s and 50s, there were a lot of different times when I wanted to reach back out to God. I kind of just decided that I believed that there was a God. So I wasn't going to fall into the camp of there isn't one. All right. Because that just didn't make any sense to me. But I was so angry growing up
Yeah.
because of everything that happened. And so I decided that I was going to succeed in my life in spite of the fact that God had just left me cold, and
Yeah.
hadn't been there for me. And that's what I thought. That's what I really
Yeah.
believed. And so again, it's that journey, that we all go through. But it wasn't until honestly recently that I fully came over the line. My wife has always held the belief for our family. She's always
Wow.
held the faith for our family. I have two sons that are just devoted Christian young men, and it is 100% because my wife was there to introduce them to faith, to help foster their growth as Christian young men, to encourage them to ask questions and
Yeah.
to seek answers through Him.
Mm.
When I was still busy being mad and still busy
Yeah.
being angry. Yeah.
Yeah.
So after my father died, and I started dealing with some of that release and sort of closure. Um, couldn't quite get to forgiveness, but
Yeah.
I was working through it. I started to try to bring God back into my life. It just never seemed to take. It always seemed superficial to me. And then I almost died a couple of times.
Can you
So
can you unpack that for us? What in the world happened? What was it that led to such a near death thing?
the first time was of my own doing. Um, I owned a real estate company. Just to keep it short, I owned real estate companies, and we were
So
very
that was your
big for
thing that
being
you were
independent.
doing. I'm driving to be a success.
Yep.
I'm going to build this real estate thing. Okay.
You got it. That was exactly what it was. I was going to go succeed. And
Yeah.
I woke up every day, just pursuing that goal, and did, by all measures, do just great. The problem is, 2008 happened. And, even though I had 5 offices in 2 states and we were, a multi-million-dollar company, as an independent, we weren't a Century
Yeah.
21 or anything like that. We were an independent. So it was huge. But that hit us so hard that
Mm.
it just destroyed everything. We literally lost everything: the house, the cars,
Unbelievable.
everything we owned, sold everything. We crashed so hard that I would actually have to, many times, go give blood to get paid to go to the store and buy food, to put food on the table that night. And,
Yeah.
we were that far down. At one point, we were about 12 hours away from being homeless.
Wow.
And again, I know people have it a lot worse than we did because I still found a way to get through most of it. But I did reach a point, Kathleen, where uh, I had really decided that the world was better off without me,
Mm.
and that my wife and my kids were going to be better off
Yeah.
without me. And so I put that into action, and had decided it. I was even calm
Yeah.
about it. It was just absolutely going to
Mm.
happen. And everybody went to bed, and I was up late like I always was. Went down the hall to say goodbye to my boys, and came back to the kitchen to take care of it,
Yeah.
and just end it. And something just came over me really hard,
Wow.
and I started convulsing, shaking, um, and I passed out on the kitchen floor out of nowhere.
Wow.
To this day, no reason why. Hasn't happened before that. Hasn't happened since.
Yeah.
Um, and that was, I woke up hours later and was overcome with this. I mean, it was covered, drenched in sweat, and like, what happened to me? It was
Yeah.
like this actual awakening, and I just kept hearing this voice. What were you thinking? What were you
Wow.
thinking? What were you thinking? And so I, grabbed a legal pad and just started making notes, pouring the notes all over the floor in the living room, and just saying, I'm going to win. I'm
Mm.
going to win. I'm going to win. I felt like I was connected to God right then. I didn't know how. I
Yeah.
didn't know why, but I just felt like He did something to wake me up.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Um, it wasn't until much later that I realized what it was, but He literally saved my life that night,
Yeah. Like divine
by knocking me out.
intervention. Yeah.
100%. That has never happened to me before. It's never happened to me since. I don't have anxiety attacks, nothing like that. Just that one time, and just knocked me down and woke me up.
So by then there was definitely a pivot in your mind. You were going to look at things differently. You had sort of a reawakening of your worth, your purpose, and everything. But you mentioned that there was another near death thing. Was that soon afterwards? When did that happen?
That was many years later. From that point that I just described, I knew there was a God. I was trying to
Yeah.
find a relationship with God. I was actively pursuing one. Talking to my wife, making some inquiries, going to church on occasion. Like, okay, how do I connect here? How do I get back?
How
Right.
old were your boys at this stage? Just out of curiosity. How-
When that happened, they were let's see, my oldest son was a junior. My
hmm.
youngest son was in
So they hadn't left the
eighth
house or anything.
grade.
They were still, yeah.
No, they were home. They were home. So yeah, from then to the other near death experience. Um, the other near death experience was just over a year ago.
Wow.
Yeah, so pretty recently. Um, and they were all gone. We were empty nesters by that point.
Yeah.
And I just thought had been sick, and I thought, well, hey, you're overweight, and you're in bad shape, and everything else, right? So this is why you feel terrible all the time.
Yeah.
And it turns out I had been carrying pneumonia for over a year
Oh my
and didn't
goodness.
know it, and it was getting worse and worse and worse, and filling up my lung. Well, I didn't know that. I just figured I kept getting the flu every 3 weeks. Didn't know why. It reached a point about in September 19th of 2024 where it had gotten so bad that I was sitting there, next to my wife, in the living room, and my breathing was getting shorter and shorter and shorter. It was like when you're measuring the time between contractions, it's like smaller and
Mhm.
smaller and smaller, and
Yeah.
then at some point you go, we got to go to the hospital. Well, I said, at this rate, I'm not going to be breathing in about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
We got to go. So my wife threw me in the truck and broke like 18 laws getting me to the hospital. And I walked into
Wow.
the emergency room and passed out on the floor because I couldn't take another breath. And I
That's
just hit the
crazy.
hit the ground. Woke
And they
up
brought,
and there was tubes coming out of me and everything else, and the whole bit. But I thought it was done. I thought it was it.
well,
I thought
thank
I was
God
done.
you recovered. That's just an
Thank God. Thank
incredible
God,
story.
indeed. Yeah.
Well, let's backtrack a little bit. First of all, that's amazing. And thank God that you're here, all the wonderful things that you're doing and all the wonderful people that you are helping. But let's
Thanks.
backtrack a little bit to when you had your epiphany after the first sort of near death experience or awakening
Hmm.
or passing out. You decided, I'm dialing in. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to sort of dig into this thing. You went from that to having all these different podcasts. And one in particular, I would just like you to touch on for a moment, and that I've heard a few episodes of, and it's called The Power of Man. I want to talk about the
Hmm.
Podcaster Nation too. But I was so inspired when I heard this, Rory, because I have been involved in some level of Christian ministry, women's ministry mostly over the years, and I've always felt there just isn't really enough for men that they,
Yeah.
from an outsider standpoint, it seems that a lot of men that I've even spoken to about this, that they don't really interact and they don't build each other up, and sometimes they become isolated. And it feels like your podcast just speaks to that person. And so I would love to hear that from you, because you didn't grow up with that father figure. You didn't grow up with that significant role model to teach you these things, but yet you're doing this
Yeah.
in such a powerful way. Would you be able to just speak into that?
Yeah. I appreciate that, and thank you. That was my first podcast that I released, and it's still going strong today. We're at almost 350 episodes, and it's a top 5% podcast in the
Incredible.
fatherhood space. So it's really been incredible is the best word. The When I woke up from being on the floor, after God sort of knocked me down and said, "Wake up,
Yeah.
fool," um, I decided that I was going to fix things. And after all of the thinking and the planning, I ended up I got 3 jobs. I worked
Three. Wow.
23 out of every 24 hours. I slept for 1 hour a night. And I knew I could do that for a while. Not forever, but I knew I could do it for a while. And what I decided that night was, or actually the next morning, was I was going to do that for at least 6 months. And if I did, I knew I could get us out of it. I know
Wow.
he helped me with that, because there's no way I shouldn't have driven off the road at some point,
Yeah.
or just my heart should have stopped, or, God knows. So, but after doing that, when we got out of it, I had a chance to kind of look back, and I realized how alone I was.
Mm.
Family was not
Yeah.
there. Friends were not there. The only people that I had that cared whether I lived or died on a daily basis were my wife, my daughter, and my 2 sons. That's it. That was it. Every other person that I thought was,
Mm,
a friend or a confidant or someone, that I could count on, they either didn't care what I was going through or they were glad I was going through it,
that's crazy.
you know. And you realize a lot about people and about the people
Yeah,
you've surrounded yourself with at that point. The reason I say all that is because Power of Man came from my desire to not ever want another man to feel that alone,
yeah,
ever, no matter what.
yeah,
And I was listening to a podcast, another one that happened to be, I was listening to a lot of podcasts back then, but I was listening to one in particular, and the guy was talking about, if you're going to start a podcast, if you're going to start a movement, if you're going to start, any kind of leadership, anything, you need to look at your own life and say, what is it, that you see as an issue and how can you become the solution? Right.
yeah,
And I said, well, if I talk into a microphone and I help one guy, there's one dad out there who doesn't make that decision to walk down the hall and say goodbye to his boys. If I can help one husband, right, who can be better at taking care of his family, then it's all worth it. And that's the idea that spawned Power of Man in the first place.
and
So
I
go
just
ahead.
have to stop you right there and say, wow. And the thing that that does immediately, that just speaks to the entire sort of mission statement or philosophy of Heal to Heal. Because what you just said is, I think, what all of this is about. And it's, whatever it is that you have gone through. And when you overcome that, you become the person that is able to help somebody else in a way that nobody else could. And so for somebody to want to listen to your podcast, how do you have any value? Like, why should they listen to you? Well, they're going to listen when they hear what you went through and that you went that close to the edge. And because so many people, they don't get that second chance because they just don't have a reason to stop it, but to hear your story now. Now that could be the thing that not just impacts one life but impacts thousands of lives. And it's just wonderful to hear it, and I just applaud it and say how courageous. Incredible that you've grown that, but then along the way, obviously, that multiplied into all these other things. Like, how did that start to happen?
Yeah, it did. It did. By doing this with Power Man, I realized that I really loved podcasting. And along the way, I was starting to listen to that voice inside of you, that I now know as God talking to you and
Yeah.
leading you and saying, hey, I need you to do this. I need you to go over here and do that. And you start to follow that. And I recognized that it was not me coming up with it. It was God telling me you're needed here. I said, okay. So, I learned all sorts of things doing Power Man. I mean, I learned everything on my own. I had no teacher, no nothing. I made every mistake you can make in the book. Um, but I built something, out of nothing. And it caught on. And it caught on in large part because I never presented myself as some expert, on that
Yeah.
podcast. I just presented myself as a guy who has a lot of scars, who's been through a lot of hell, and if you listen to what I have to say, maybe you can avoid getting the scar yourself. And if not, hey, go for it. And when you get that scar, come back here and we can commiserate about it. All right.
Yeah.
But if I can help you, then listen, because I went down this road. It didn't go well. But the next podcast that really worked, I had several podcasts that I started along the way in between Power of Man and the Podcaster Nation. Um, they kind of came and went. They were
Mhm.
based on other things, other interests, other attempts, right? Because I had other things I wanted to try to do. But Podcaster Nation was, me sitting there one day and going, there's really nothing out there that's, for podcasters. Like we don't have a thing that highlights us. We just are sort of unknown. Like no one really cares what we're doing unless they need us, right?
Mhm.
And I kind of heard this voice like, well, what are you doing about it? And I said,
Wow.
well, nothing. I'm just sitting there complaining about it. I guess I should do something about it. And I
So good.
said it out loud, and my wife goes, well, go do something about it. I said, do you think I should do
That's
this? She goes, do you think you should do this? I said, I think I should. She goes, then go do it. That was it. I mean, I already had the whole setup. So I just came down and recorded episode 1 off my heart. That
that's
was it. I
incredible.
put up put up one post in one group, and got 135 responses right off the bat, and Podcaster Nation was born.
So that makes me think of a whole bunch of different things. First of all, that must have been a confirmation that you had been listening to the spirit, because it feels like when you get in sort of an alignment, it's taken me sort of my whole life to figure some of this out. When we start to get in some alignment, it's not that everything becomes perfect, but we do sometimes see the confirmation that we're on the right road, and we can kind of sense it too. And especially from somebody that went through the kind of abuse and trauma that you went through. Um, this path of healing and starting to listen to the Holy Spirit, like what would you say to somebody who is suffering right now, who is in a deep place of whether it's abandonment or abuse, or that feels like, where am I going? What would be some things that you would speak into their lives about hearing from God? And what kind of encouragement could you give them?
That's a great question. The first thing I would say is get quiet. You have to stop actively trying to solve everything under the sun. And especially, I've said this to on my podcast before to fathers and husbands, because again, I'm not a woman, so I can't speak to how you guys operate,
Yeah.
no matter how fascinating it might be. I can only speak to myself and what I know to be the case. But I know that we don't get quiet. We just don't.
Mm.
We try, but most men that I come in contact with are not peaceful creatures. It's not part of our
Yeah.
normal makeup. And if we become peaceful, it's because we're broken and because we're beaten and we're giving up.
Yeah.
And that's where it's not really peace. It's sort of just this dull surrender. But you need to get quiet for a minute,
Yeah.
because our inner voice gets really muddled when we're the ones doing the talking.
Yeah.
And so we have to stop and we have to listen to what are we being told, not what are we telling ourselves. And when you can do that, you can start to hear it just a little bit. And it only takes a whisper to grab onto it and go, maybe that's the voice I got to listen to. The other thing is that you have to open up your fist. Okay.
Mm.
Because what we do, what I've always done is when I get into a problem, I immediately go into fight mode. I
Ah.
immediately go into I've got it's combat time. I
Yeah.
clench my fist, I tighten myself up, I seal my heart, and I go out and I try and win. And I think that's very, very normal. And the
Yeah.
only way you can let God in is if you open that up and you let Him in and you say, okay, I can't go do this on my own. Please help me.
Wow.
Please tell me what I should do. It's a very difficult thing for men to do. I don't like to use the word vulnerable because that just is a terrible word. It's on my do not use list. But you have to open yourselves up and stop fighting for just 1 second. That's what I mean. You got to get quiet. And I think that then maybe you can hear the whisper of that voice just enough to shed some light on it.
That's fascinating. And I think that's really well said. I think it's just like, I like to think of it, it's a voice like any other voice that you start to recognize as you commune, as you seek it, as you're looking for it, becomes more clear that that's the voice that it is, and how wonderful that you did that. I also think of that quote by C.S. Lewis about vulnerability. And he says that to love at all requires vulnerability. And I think that's something we should all think about. It's like, it's so tempting to close yourself off when you've been hurt, but love always requires a level of vulnerability, and we just have to be able to trust God for that. But speaking about men and being able to let go and like listen and those kind of things, also just like the path of healing, I think probably for men and women is blocked for people because it's so hard to let go of those things. You mentioned earlier reaching a place where you were angry, but then you let some of that go. What was your process of forgiveness like for the things that had come against you? Like, how did that look?
It was non-existent for a while, and I'm Italian, so to start with, we
Already.
don't we
You
we
don't mess
just
with
are
you.
we are genetically predisposed to not just forgive and forget. I
Yeah,
mean, we literally invented vendettas. It's like
that's
getting even. So it's hard to go against your heritage like that. But my path with forgiveness was rough because so much of what happened to me from my father,
mm,
and then from my stepfather later on. Um, my mom had a type, I guess, but so much of what happened to me from there was a choice.
mm,
I don't believe alcoholism is a disease. I don't believe that drug addiction is a disease. I say that freely, and I'll take anybody on
Mhm.
anytime.
Yeah.
It's a choice.
Yeah.
And people say, well, they're in so much pain, they have to do it. No, no, no. You're literally choosing to solve your own pain by causing pain to the people that
Mm.
depend on you. That's your choice because you know the next day everything you did. You see the bruises, you see the blood, you see the hospital bills, you know what happened.
Yeah.
And then the next night, you still make that decision to numb your own pain with the same product that does this to you. So that's a choice
Yeah.
where your comfort, your salvation, physically speaking and emotionally, is more important than the welfare of your family. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the end of the story. I'm not going to debate that with anybody. Um, so, because it was such a choice, it's so difficult to forgive.
Yeah.
If it was truly something that was out of his control,
Yeah.
it'd be different. Then maybe I could find a way to forgive. So, for the longest time, I said, this guy made a choice to
Yeah.
do this to us. And, at 5 years old, I'm having to make a choice to misbehave in order to take the beating for my mom. That's that's not okay. So it did take me a long time. And I didn't really forgive him until after, the second near death experience. Um,
Wow.
when I was laying on the floor of the hospital, out, and then I came to, obviously, you're not thinking about your dad at that point, but you are suddenly face to face with the fact that you're dying and you
Mm.
don't really know why or what or anything at that point. They sent me in for a surgery that I should not have survived. With
Yeah.
my age and my condition and everything else, I had about a 20% or less chance of coming out. And I did.
Yeah.
um, and so when I was laying there, my life completely changed, Kathleen, in the
Absolutely.
3 weeks after the surgery.
Yeah.
I was in the hospital, can't watch that TV anymore. You're in the quiet, in the dark all night. You can't sleep because the pain's so bad. I'm not letting them give me hardly any painkillers because I'm afraid of, addiction and everything else. So I'm just
Mhm.
dealing with all kinds of pain. And my wife is right there by my side every minute of every night, awake with me.
Wow.
And we had talks and discussions like we never had before. And somewhere
That's
in the middle of
incredible.
that, we talked about my dad. And she said, it's time, for you to let that go
Wow.
and to finally, forgive him. And that was really brutal, but that's when it happened. And when that happened, I was able to, all of a sudden, I had removed the biggest barrier
Mm.
between me and God. And I was able to really connect. And I felt like for the first time in my life, Jesus Christ was standing in front of me,
That is
holding my hand.
remarkable.
So
Remarkable. Remarkable. Thank you for
decided I wasn't going
being
to cry on your podcast.
no. Thank you for being willing to share that. I mean, not to segue, but I've went through a really difficult struggle with forgiveness too, and ended up writing a book about that. And because I believe in it so much, it is so powerful to hear you because it is a block. I think we sometimes confuse the thing that we're forgiving with saying that the thing's okay. It's not okay. Wasn't okay what happened to you. And it definitely isn't. But look what you've done to overcome that. That's powerful. So your wife, she sounds like an extraordinary woman. I mean, she has been really just but not only by your side but speaking encouragement and life. Can you tell us just a little bit about what that's been like? It sounds like you've got a wonderful marriage.
I I think we do actually. We both, when we came together. I love this. Nobody ever asked me about that, so thank you. That was a great pickup, and I appreciate it very much. My When she and I came together, we came together with the idea that we were going to devote our lives to our kids. And that was, no matter what, the
Mm.
most important thing because we knew that we had a short amount of time where they were going to be our kids under our roof and where,
Mhm.
we got to be kind of really involved. We knew once they grew up and took off to go conquer the world on their own that we would be in a different spot. So we gave up all kinds of things. A lot of people will say that's not healthy. You should still do this and still do that and blah, blah, blah. But, we really just were united in nothing else matters as long as we do what we can for the kids.
Yeah.
Now, when they grew up and all left, and my youngest son left quick, so there was no real processing out of the empty nest. There was no closure. It was, bye, bing, wow, crickets, you know.
Wow.
But when my youngest one left, my wife and I sat down on the couch and we were like, "Hi, nice to meet you. Now what?" And we've been working on it ever since. Not a day goes by where we're not sort of talking or thinking or feeling or doing something about where we're going now.
Yeah.
As a couple, as a married couple, we're not as mom and dad, but as Rory and Andrea. It's been amazing to have the journey that I've had with her. I mean, this woman, Kathleen, I'm not even gonna joke. This woman could have done better than me on accident. I mean, really.
She's beautiful for
She
sure. I've
could,
seen pictures. Yeah.
put on a blindfold, walk out in the middle of traffic, and bump into a car that's better than me. Oh, I'm telling you,
Amazing.
no, I would not have stayed with me all these years. I would not have stuck it out. She's put up with more than anybody ever should be asked to put up with, and she's never wavered, not once. And so, yeah, she's amazing, and I'm blessed. And so,
Yeah.
right now, I mean, my purpose right now is to sort of give back to her. To be honest,
Yeah.
is what I'm trying to do now. I want to take her places we couldn't go before. I want to do things for her we couldn't do. I want to let her experience things she's always dreamed of, but we gave it all up for the kids. And so that's really kind of what drives me in my life right now, is that. So I do
That's
appreciate you asking about that.
That's incredible. Well, that answers a question I was sort of going to ask a little bit later on, but I think that's so beautiful because we are meant to live, Christian marriage is meant to be such a partnership. And it really sounds like she was there for you in all the difficult times through your life. And so now you're willing to just to be there for her in such an extraordinary way. And I'm sure that your children are so proud of you. And, I'd love if you want to tell me anything that's going on with them. But you can do that or not. But one thing I want to make sure we talk about just briefly or just is a little bit about the other podcast. I'm really fascinated by the Wake Up the Lines podcast. So I would love if you would speak to the audience about why that came about. But the Podcaster Nation, I'm curious. I don't mean to hit you with 7 questions in one, like some kind of crazy
So let me
interviewer.
write them all down. Hold on a second.
What is it about podcasting that you think it does for the world? And what does the Podcaster Nation do to help with that? I mean, so that's a lot.
Wow. All right. Let me deconstruct this. I love it.
Yeah.
You're just so excited. I love your energy. It's filling me up right now. So that's fantastic. Quickly about my kids, because that was the first thing you talked about.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
I'm sure that they are proud of me in their own way. They're also, I mean, I have a daughter and 2 sons, and, my daughter and I, we get along great. And the problem is she's just like I am. And so, we're always going to butt heads. But, my boys are still boys. So they'd rather razz me about not being as tall as I used to be, because my spine's taken a beating with all these surgeries
thing, right?
and everything that's happened. Yeah, so they'd rather do that, but I did on Power Man. I celebrated my 300th episode by having them come on as guests, and I just let them talk about growing up and about how life was. It's pinned to my profile on my Facebook profile. If anybody wants to go look at it, it's pinned there. So it's the first thing you look at. If they want to look me up on Facebook at Rory Paquette, but it's I was in tears, heavy during that episode, after that episode. I mean, it was incredibly moving to hear my 2 sons just talking, about us growing up and, things they learned and, things that didn't work, and stuff like that. They got to kind of say some of the stuff they don't normally say on that podcast. And I could tell that they kind of decided, hey, Dad wants us to go on his 300th podcast. This is a big deal. Let's be serious about it. Because even though there was a little joke and it was nothing like the level of humor like we normally have. So that was, if anybody wants to know the story of me and my boys, watch Power Man 300 and watch it on YouTube. It's like really something.
I'm definitely going to do that.
Other than that, to answer the other questions, Wake Up the Lions was the third podcast I have right now. It came after the Podcaster Nation, and it came as a result of I had people coming on Power Man and coming on the Podcaster Nation. And the first question out of their mouths was, is it okay to talk about God here? Or do I need to
Oh,
tone down the God thing? And I was venting one night because I had like 3 preachers in a row, pastors, right? Come on Power Man for different reasons. One wrote a book, one had a course, right? One was church planting. And all 3 of them were like, do we need to tone down the God thing? And I'm like, why would you ever? I mean, if I said yes, you need to tone it down, why wouldn't you leave my podcast and like
right. So forget
and
it.
say, get out, I'm out of here then, But it just, that's not the world that we live in right now. And I was venting about that and to my wife. And in the middle of venting about it, I literally, Kathleen, I kid you not, I heard the voice say
Here
to
we go
me,
again. What are you gonna
what are you doing about it?
do?
And I answered out loud, well, not much. I'm just sitting here complaining,
Wow.
And I said it all out loud and I was talking to my wife. She looked at me like, are you,
What?
was
Are
that,
you
or
crazy?
like, she kind of got what was happening.
Yeah.
Cause I said out loud, I guess I'm just complaining about it, you know? And I said, well, I know how to do all this, right? It's not like I can't start a podcast in 5 minutes. So I did. I started it right then. I recorded the first episode that night and I said, this is it. We're moving forward. And I created a
Yeah.
place for Christians to come on and to share their testimony and share how God's influenced their life and, talk about God. We talk about spiritual
Yeah.
warfare and how it impacts them. Talk about building discipleship, right? Bring on fabulous people like you who write these books and are doing all these great works in His name. That's how you and I met.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the one that I just got called to do, and the results are insane.
Yeah.
Power Man's doing great. It's a top 5% podcast now. The Podcaster Nation's doing great. It's a top 10% podcast. And Wake Up the Lions on a weekly basis right now is outperforming them both. And I'm
That's
going,
crazy. That's amazing. I have
whoa,
to interject one quick thing. I'm going to
yeah,
tack on even more questions to the other questions I
that's
already
okay.
asked
I
you,
still
which is
have
what I
one
should
answer
be
left, but
doing.
go ahead.
But one thing I want to make sure and mention that Rory does, in addition to all these other things, so please tell us about the other podcasts as well. But I want to ask you um, to tell the audience about your coaching that you do for speakers, for podcasters as well. So just like, don't let me forget to ask you about that.
Okay. All right. The last thing from the first batch of questions, I'm pretty sure, was about the Podcaster Nation and how we're
Yes,
impacting
tell,
things.
tell us about podcasting in the United States. What's going on?
Yeah, the Podcaster Nation is a way for podcasters, another way for podcasters to connect with one another. It's also a great place for podcasters to come on and tell their story because, like, you're the host right now. And so if
Mhm.
all you ever do is host, you don't get to tell your story
Yeah.
to your audience. And so one thing I wanted to do, because I was hosting all the time,
Yeah.
and I realized that unless I did this solo episode, then I never got to talk about, my thoughts and my beliefs.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to bring podcasters on to tell their story and to kind of explain to people why they do what they do and to give folks a chance to connect with that podcaster
Mhm.
and not just with their podcast.
That makes
You
sense.
know, if you care about the person behind the mic, then you care even more about what they have to say. And as soon as I started doing that, it took off. And podcasters were like, this is amazing. No one ever does this. This is great.
Yeah.
And they loved getting out of your chair and into this chair, right?
Yeah.
On a regular basis and talking about what they're doing. So it's been great to do that. But, podcasting is, I think, the most personal communication out there. It's the most personal media that's out there.
Mhm.
And I think it's the future because you deliver something of great value to a public that is interested in the topic that
Sure.
they can consume whenever they want,
Yeah.
and all of those things really matter in today's world. So I think podcasting is incredibly important. I think everybody should have a podcast. I think every business should have a podcast. If you're an independent contractor like a realtor or insurance agent or anything, you absolutely should have a podcast, because it's the way to communicate with people now that I think is
And
the
when you
most effective.
also,
So
just to piggyback, not to interrupt you, but that makes
go
me
ahead.
think too of the AI world that we're in, that AI is affecting so many industries. And although it can be a tool that can be, used for good or bad or whatever, I think that it is so much danger that we lose the ability to really connect with real people. So to me, that would even amplify what you're just saying about podcasting as well, wouldn't you think?
Yeah. And you mentioned you wanted to get back to whether or not I was coaching. One of the things that I coach podcasters on, especially, is like when we were kids, we were all told, hey, learn how to do the math on your own without the calculator. Okay. Because you may not have a calculator on you every day.
Yeah.
Well, now we do have a calculator every day. But, if you know how to do the math ahead of time, then it doesn't matter if you have the calculator. It doesn't matter what tool you have, or if it doesn't work, you can always do it. And not only that, but you know where the answer comes from.
Yeah.
Okay. And I coach podcasting the same way. You need to learn how to do your podcast without AI so that you can learn this is how this works. This is how I
Yeah.
connect here. This is how this should work. Now, once you've done that, then you can pick the spots where you think AI can help you, maybe go a little faster, save some time, and then you can incorporate AI in. But I always coach to just keep AI on the back burner and learn the stuff and learn the steps, um, because you have to learn how to do it yourself first.
Yeah.
AI is very close to being out of control, unfortunately.
Yeah.
There are ads on Facebook right now for AI, prompts and programs that people will sell you and hook you up with that you could just download, where the AI records your image, the AI
Mhm.
records your voice, and you feed into it what you want, and it does all of it for you.
Yeah.
It will do the whole episode for you, and instead of you doing it.
Yeah.
So you don't have to appear on camera, right? If you're afraid of that.
Yeah.
You don't have to speak in public if you're afraid of that. You can just let AI do it. That is honestly, as far as I'm concerned, the devil's work,
I agree too.
period. Because
Because there has to
when
be a
you
line,
take the
right?
soul
Yeah.
out, oh, take the soul out of something like that, and that's exactly what he wants. He wants a bunch of soulless, fakes out there, so that there's no real connection and there's no heart. And when you take that away, then it's pretty easy to make your move on faith and get that removed as well. So
That's very well
that's my
said.
feeling on AI.
Yeah. Well, that makes me all the more thankful for the work that you're doing through all these podcasts, because you really do bring the heart and soul into it, into everything you do. And for anybody that would listen to this, you have heard him speak himself, so you can hear. But I encourage you highly to go listen to some of these podcasts. They are so well done, and there's so much heart. And for me, like if you connect with somebody, if they're speaking from their heart, you're going to connect, and that's just who he is. That's who this man is, and that just makes it wonderful that he's here. We're getting a little bit short on time, but before we finish, just a couple things I'd love to hear, about the other ones, just at least mention them. And
Mm-hmm.
then the last thing I was going to ask you to do would be to look to the future. You've been healed in so many ways, and now you're bringing that healing to the world. And one of your goals that you already mentioned was that you want to spend time, living with your wife and making her a priority. How as you look to the future, do you balance these things with that purpose in mind, with so many different sort of overlapping demands and responsibilities on your life? How do you do that? How do you do that and make it work so effectively?
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. First, the other podcasts. I have the three we've talked about. Then I have Step Up to the Mic, which is a podcast for speakers to come on and literally do their talk. So I introduce them. I click my camera off. They have the stage uninterrupted to do their signature talk. And when they're done, I come back on. It's a quick Q&A and we're done. What we end up doing is giving them a quick link for them to then send out to help them get speaking gigs. It's very unique. I haven't seen any other podcast like it. So there's that. And then there's The Right Path, and it's WRITE, Right Path. And it's for authors. And it's not just about your book, but it's about what's behind the book, what went into the book,
Yeah.
why the book, and everything else. So it's very much more about the author and what went into it than it is about the actual book that's being sold, although we are, of course, talking about the book that needs to be sold. So I'm never going to go on there and go, so what made you write the book? Like they get from every other podcast out there. So those are there. And then I co-host one called Boiling Point, Faith and Fire, with a very fiery friend of mine, Brandon Lynette, who Like I said, we co-host it, and it's about current events and things like that. And she's the fire, and I try to bring the faith to keep
Yeah.
everything in between the navigational beacons, so to speak. And so those are my podcasts. As far as the other question, um, I'm building a life now where with my podcasting and with my coaching and with the other things that I do social media management for people also, because I know how to grow accounts. So um, I do all of these things. And yes, I do like to work 12, 15-hour days because I like to. But if I were to right now stop and say, I'm not going to do any work on my podcasts for 2 weeks, I have content for months and months and months. So I could
Wow.
literally just walk away if I wanted to, and nothing would change. All my podcasts would continue to go out. My social media would continue to go out. Everything would continue to go out because it could all be planned, booked ahead of time, and done. So I have, and I am in the process of building this life where we can be mobile. We can live anywhere we want because we're not tied to anything. I can podcast from any place in the whole world. So we can do that. We're mobile, and also I'm not tied down time wise.
Yeah.
I had 2 weddings in 3 weeks, and the weddings were on Friday. So I needed Thursday, Friday,
Congratulations. Those were your
Saturday.
children, right? Your children?
Yeah, exactly. My
Yeah.
oldest son and my daughter, right? They got married in 2 weeks apart in October, and I needed like 6 days off in a 3-week period. If I'd have been working a regular job, there's no way I get Thursday, Friday, Saturday off 2 out of 3 weeks in October.
Yeah.
There's no way you get that kind of vacation time. I was able to do it because I decided I was going to do it. So
Wow.
that's how I'm doing it. That's what I decided, laying in that bed in the dark, trying to heal from the thing that should have killed me, was that I was never going to work for another person, another company, another entity. Nothing was going to have control over me ever again. No matter what, I was going to
Yeah.
find a way. And my wife said, okay, let's do it. So that was it.
That is so inspiring. I mean, it just really is like all the different things, all the components that are included with that, like just the comeback story, the way that God has led you, the way that you've been able to, with his help, like build this, build an empire, but this time co-laboring with God, I would say, just like with him and you and your wife and the way that he's, it's like seek first the kingdom of God and all these things shall be added unto you. That's like a verse that we could just like apply over your life. And so thank you for all the work that you're doing. And for anybody that's listening, you see that this guy, if he can do this many podcasts and be able to walk away, he has this thing down to a science. So make sure you check the show notes because we're going to have his coaching. We're going to have his contact information. You can ask him about the coaching. You can get in touch with him. You can start listening to his podcast. They're amazing. So on behalf of the Heal to Heal group, we just want to thank you, Rory, for coming on and for sharing your heart. What an incredibly powerful conversation. And friends, if this has encouraged you, I just ask that you would please share with anybody that you think it could encourage or leave a review that could help more people find us. We are here to help people connect with healing. For now, just remember, Heal to Heal is not just a podcast. It's not just a book. It is a movement meant to touch lives, and you're invited. So come, receive your healing, and then carry that healing to the world. Heal to Heal.